Hi everybody, my name's Julia from Bobbins and Buttons. I've recently published a new pattern, which is the Jayne dress, and this is a lady's version of my Rosie dress, which is the little girl's version. So it's a really nice simple pull-on pinafore, no zips to deal with, it just fastens at the shoulders with 2 buttons. And the pattern comes with 2 different pocket options. There's inseam pockets through a panel in the middle, and then there's patch pockets. So today I'm going to do a tutorial to show you how to make and apply the patch pockets. So the first thing to do is just to finish the edge of the upper pocket opening. So this is the edge that will be turned in to make the top of the pocket. So for this pocket, all I've done is literally overlock that edge, but you could also zigzag the edge. If you've got a lighter weight fabric that's quite crisp, you might want to turn a double turned hem. But I'm making this dress in a medium weight woven linen, and it does have a little bit, it has a slightly bulky nature, so that's why I've opted for just a single turned hem rather than a double turned hem. The other thing that I want to mention is that if you were making this in a lighter weight fabric, or perhaps a stable knit like Ponte Roma, you might want to consider just interfacing the upper edge of the pocket along this part, just to prevent that from stretching when it's made into a pocket. So I've also pressed along the upper edge of the pocket. So to do that, all I've done is take the corner point there of the outer angle and this inner one, and just bring those down in line with the edges of the pocket, so they're nicely matched up, and then pressed along to keep that nice and sharp. So now we need to bring this back right sides up and bring the hem, the pocket hem, right sides together, and we're going to stitch this upper point here. So I'm just going to put a pin here, making sure that's still nicely lined up, and now I'm going to stitch from the top edge to this inner edge, just reinforcing a bit at both ends because it's a very short amount of stitching. So before I turn that through, I'm just now going to trim off the corner, so taking the bulk away from the corner there, and now bring that right sides out. So you may need to just tweak the corner. I quite like to do this with a pin, just to bring that to a nice sharp point, and then go and repress that edge to make sure it's nice and sharp again. So that's nicely pressed, and now I'm going to stitch from one end to the other just above the overlock stitching, but I'm going to find a gauge on the sewing machine to keep a nice straight line, but working from the back up. So I'm just going to put a few pins in there to hold that in place. And when I get to this end, I'm going to do a good bit of reinforcing there again, just to stop that from coming undone. So there we go, nicely stitched. I'm going to do exactly the same on the other pocket so that I have a pair of pockets. So the next stage is to press this edge in. So I'm going to run a line of ease stitches. So I'm going to change the stitch on the sewing machine up to 5, and then just stitch within the seam allowance, so about 1 centimetre, just over 1 centimetre in, just around the main part of the curve, so that I can pull this up to create a nice curve. I do have a separate tutorial here on the YouTube channel showing this in a little bit more detail, so I'll add a link below to that tutorial. So I've stitched from here to here, and now what I'm going to do is just pull this stitch up so it just before it starts to gather. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull this ease stitch so it starts to gather. The one thing I didn't mention is don't back stitch at either point for this ease stitching, because you want the stitches to be able to pull smoothly. So you can see that starting to gather. And basically I'm going to tease it out now so it's not as much as a gather. And once you see the shape starting to pull in but without actually being gathered, that's the point at which I'm going to press it. So that's looking about right. So I'm going to take that to the iron now and just press the seam allowance in, starting right from the edge all the way right to the end of the pocket edge. So I've pressed around the whole edge, and on the front it looks nice and even. So what I would say before you do anything else with this pocket is make your other pocket and just put the two pockets side by side to check that your curve is the same, because sometimes you can find you end up pressing a little bit more in, it just sort of naturally curves round at that point where it's gathered. But as long as it matches the other one, it's not too much of a problem, but you're just ideally looking for two symmetrical pockets. So I'm going to go ahead and make the other pockets, and then we're ready to apply these to the dress. So I've made my pair of pockets. It's probably just worth mentioning at this point, if you are working with fabric that's the same on both sides, just check you are making a pair of pockets, because you don't want to end up with two pockets facing the same direction, or you'd end up having to unpick. So the next thing to do is to sew the pockets to the front of the dress. So let's bring the dress in. So the pockets go into the side seam, so they're really nice and easy to place, but there are two little notches on the side of the pattern where the pocket sits between. So the part that butts up to the edge of the side seam sits between those two notches. So I've just marked the notches with a tiny little nick there and there. So once you've positioned that, you can pin that so it matches up to the side seam, and then flatten the pocket out and pin around the rest of the pocket. I tend to pin the whole thing, even though you're not going to be sewing the pocket opening, just to keep it nice and flat while you work on it. And sometimes put some pins this way. As long as you're not actually sewing over the pin, you're fine, or you can take them out as you go along, but they're well back from where I'm going to stitch. There we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stitch machine tack along this edge so that the two side seams are held together, and that just needs to be within the seam allowance so that you don't end up needing to unpick that. And then for this edge I'm going to stitch about 2 or 3 mil away from the edge around the edge, just back stitching strongly at the start, because that's obviously going to get a bit of pressure if you use your pockets by putting your hands in them all the time. So yeah, let me go ahead and show you how that looks. So that's the side seam stitched together, and now I'm going to do the edge stitching around the pocket. And there we go. Nicely stitched, so I can go ahead and do the same on the other. You can see the stitching's well away from the pins. So I can stitch the other pocket and then go ahead and make the rest of the dress up. So I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up if you did, and if you'd like to see more tutorials, please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.